Good morning. I'm Pastor Kelly. It's already mid-May 2020. I don't know how that happened. It's been about 2 months since we've seen one another in person, and I miss you very much. I know that you miss each other very much. It's hard for a pastor to not see people when people is what really compels us to be in the line of this work. Loving God, but loving our neighbor as ourselves, a little harder to do from a distance. I look forward to the time that we can return to worship together. If you saw Gabriel's Trumpet, our weekly email newsletter, this last Thursday, you know that Church Council has given much consideration and thought to what is going on around us. We've gathered feedback from our boards and staff and is not ready at this time to set a date for beginning worship in person. Like many churches around us, we recognize that the state of Ohio just this week started a reopening process, starting up businesses and other enterprises again, and there is a concern about an increase or a spike in infections across communities as that happens. We don't feel this is the best time to set a date, and so we're waiting, watching, and also working on a reentry plan that establishes, complies with safety protocols established by the state and the CDC, and puts into place some really thoughtful logistics and processes for welcoming us back into the building when the time is right, in ways that ensure that great thought has gone into our safety while we are worshiping. So please be patient. Thank you for your support, and thank you for the ways that you're calling each other, you're caring for each other, and you're working to be the church, be the presence of Christ to others in a really difficult time that I know is a difficult time for you too.
Hear now our call to worship. We worship the God who inhabits our world and indwells our lives. We need not look up to find God. We need only to look around, within ourselves, beyond ourselves, into the eyes of another. We need not listen for a distant thunder to find God. We need only listen to the music of life, the words of children, the questions of the curious, the rhythm of a heartbeat. We worship the God who inhabits our world and who indwells our lives. Amen.
Mercy
Testament reading is from the book of Psalm, chapter 66, verses 13 through 20. I will come into your house with burnt offerings. I will pay you my vows, those that my lips uttered and my mouth promised when I was in trouble. I will offer to you burnt offerings of fatlings, with the smoke of the sacrifice of rams. I will make an offering of bulls and goats. Come and hear, all you who fear God, and I will tell you what God has done for me. I cried aloud to God, and God was extolled with my tongue. If I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. But truly God has listened. God has given heed to the words of my prayer. Blessed be God, because God has not rejected my prayer or removed God's steadfast love from me. Today's gospel is taken from the book of John, chapter 14, verses 15 through 21. Jesus said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask God, and God will give you another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees God nor knows God. You know God because God abides with you, and God will be in you. I will not leave you orphaned. I'm coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day, you will know that I am in God, and you in me, and I in you. They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by God, and I will love them and reveal myself to them." This is the word of our still speaking God.
So although we're still in the season of Easter, the gospel scriptures for this week continue what is known as Jesus's farewell discourse, the promises, lessons, and reassurances that Jesus had shared with his disciples before his arrest, trial, and crucifixion. The words that we hear today are placed in this post-resurrection worship season, in our season of Easter, even though it's just before his arrest, for a very good reason. Primarily, Jesus's words in John were a gift to his close friends and followers, who he knew would one day be following his teachings the way he had taught them and shown them, but that they would be doing so without his physical presence. In other words, though they may not have grasped the full depth of the meaning at the time, disciples like Thomas and Peter and the others were going to have to adjust one day to a new normal, a way of living their lives and following Jesus and being faithful that wasn't just like what in hindsight might have appeared to be the good old days. They would have to relinquish their grip on their previous way of following Jesus in the flesh in order to faithfully embrace and live into what a new day called for after the resurrection. In light of that, what Jesus had told them in the past, before his arrest, trial, and crucifixion, now in light of the resurrection made a lot more sense. This advocate or spirit of truth he told them to expect, that was something they needed now. We might think back on words of wisdom, comfort, and love from our cherished parents, grandparents, or mentors, people who are no longer with us, and perceive how, though physically gone, some aspects of who they were and what they taught us continue on with us in our lives in a spiritual, mysterious way. I think this is the gift that Jesus gave to the disciples. And no doubt it was a cherished gift. This promise of Emmanuel, right, which means God with us, that would, when they no longer had him in person, would continue to abide with them in some form, in the form of a spiritual advocate, a spirit of truth and wisdom to lead them forward and accompany them into an uncertain, unknown future that they knew, if nothing else, was going to be nothing like the past. And so in that way, I think these words are relevant, especially in these moments for us. That promise of Christ, of the Spirit abiding with us, is something we can rely on in our own day and age, though in ordinary times it might be easy to forget. This week, I read an essay written by a Belgian virologist named Peter Piat, who spent the bulk of his career studying viruses and fighting viruses like Ebola, HIV, and most recently the coronavirus, until he was infected. Once he experienced the virus, he described at length the ways it ravaged his health last month and the ways it lured his scientific-based, rational mind into more fear-based, emotional, less rational thoughts in moments. And he reflected on the ways that having the virus has shifted his view and perspective on life. Speaking of viruses as opponents or adversaries, he said, "I've always had great respect for viruses, and that has not diminished. I've devoted much of my life to the fight against the AIDS virus. It's such a clever thing. It evades everything we do to block it. Now that I have felt the compelling presence of a virus in my body myself, I look at viruses differently. I realize this one will change my life, despite the confrontational experiences I've had with viruses before. I feel more vulnerable. I remain a born optimist, and now that I have faced death, my tolerance levels for nonsense and BS have gone down even more than before. So I continue calmly and enthusiastically, although more selectively than before my illness. Having spent his whole adult career studying some of the most dangerous known viruses, working to help humanity overcome and fight them, this man had now experienced one of them and lived. And he now confesses or concedes that both the future is different and that he is different. At the same time, what he says has not changed is his optimism, his sense of enthusiasm, and his sense of calm, of peace, despite the present reality and uncertain future. Spiritual consultant Susan Beaumont gave this advice to faith leaders about moving ahead and communicating with church members in the time of a pandemic. She wrote, "We're in a liminal season, stuck between an ending and a new beginning. The pathway forward is not knowable. The way we did church even 2 months ago is done. We have literally been thrown out of our buildings by a pandemic. We can reassure people and ourselves by pretending the disruption is temporary. We can say we will resume all normal activity soon. That reassurance is not helpful or truthful. Instead, she recommends surrendering, yielding to what is, to lean into the disorientation of this moment, the disruption of the ordinary, rather than to fight it, fueled by the illusion that we can recreate the past if we work hard enough." Beaumont suggests that in some ways the status quo of the church has failed Christians long before this moment of crisis, but there was too much pain involved in letting it go. She writes, "All innovation begins with disorientation. The pandemic has thrown us into deep disorientation. Now we have no choice but to let go of the old normal. We occupy space on both sides of a threshold. One foot is rooted in something trying to end. Another is planted in a thing not yet defined, something waiting to begin. The resurrection of Jesus was good news, but still it meant a new beginning. Disciples huddled behind locked doors, disoriented, afraid, and without the very person who'd brought them together and led them into a spiritual movement and ministry. Grief and fear were as much a part of that new beginning as joy and hope. Since that time, humanity has lived through many new beginnings, new chapters in history, for better or for worse. Our ancestors have faced plagues, pandemics, wars, natural disasters, and famines. We've witnessed feats of courage and faith and goodness, seen new medicines invented to prevent and cure disease, airplanes and rockets created that appear to defy the force of gravity, technology that brings our face and voices into one another's living rooms across the miles, science that has replaced failed hearts and organs and joints. We've lived through experiences that perhaps give us a false illusion of control over our lives, and experiences like this pandemic that remind us how fragile our lives really and truly are. Through it all, the church itself has morphed, divided, shrunk, expanded, and constantly, albeit often reluctantly, shifted and changed to reflect changes in culture, time, values, location, new insights in science, inclusivity, and generational differences. Like the very first disciples listening to the words of Jesus, our story of faith continues, but we are right now imagining a new chapter, yet unseen, like it or not. So let's hear Jesus' words spoken to his disciples as meant for us. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. I ask of God, who will give to you another advocate to be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. I will not leave you orphaned, he reassures us. Though we can't hinge our physical and spiritual well-being on the impossible hope that nothing in our lives or church or world will ever change, we can hinge our hope on the promises and assurances of Jesus, that the God who's always been with us goes with us into this new chapter, whatever that will look like. We will not be left alone. Most of what is going on around us right now, we can't control. We can grieve what is lost and what is changing, but still trust in God and in faith embrace new things that might be emerging out of this chaos. New ways of connecting with each other, previously unimagined ways of caring for our neighbors, creative approaches to advocating for justice, unseen possibilities for worship and discipleship. And like the first disciples and countless believers who lived before us, we can trust that we will be accompanied by the divine who's always been with us. May Jesus' promises of spiritual companionship in an unknown future sustain us, and may they free us from what holds us back in fear so that we can be brave, hopeful, spiritually wise, and faithful together. We're in this together, and we are not left alone.